Cooking is the story of my life. For me, it started when I was very young, 2, 3. After I started walking and started talking, I would pull carrots from the ground, I would pluck mulberries from the trees and cook a lot at home for my friends and my family. My whole family was very interested in cooking. I must have seemed like a very greedy child, but I was genuinely interested in knowing everything. I moved on to the US to complete my studies, and then I went to the UK. And my job was as a computer scientist, and then I worked in the business world in banking. And I always cooked at home. It was for me a way to really relieve my pressure and to entertain friends at home, because eating in New York and London can be expensive, and often you miss the fun and the simple pleasure of cooking at home. So I've cooked for 1 people, 10 people, 5,000 people. I've cooked in a kitchen where there was hardly room to move, to cooking in large professional kitchens. And this last summer, I made cakes for 7,000 people at an outdoor location in southern Germany. And I think this can only be explained by passion. This almost a need to want to do a lot. And I think I made a lot of people really happy, but most times I felt like an insatiable need to want to cook. And I was just glad it was matched by an insatiable appetite on the receiving end. And I would say, besides the passion, it's also an art, because something like this bread, this is part of civilization of man when they first discovered fermentation. And bread looks very simple and needs much less effort, but the knowledge behind baking bread is actually very old. So in fact, the more experience one has, or the more experienced cook one learns from, the better the technique. Cooking is an intuitive art, but it's also an application of science. And I was always a bit conflicted, because my experience was as a computer scientist, but I enjoyed cooking much more than I enjoyed programming. And then it just occurred to me one day that the human brain is like a computer. And if I kind of start to analyze how and why of working in the kitchen, it could turn into a computer software. And so I started exploring. So questions like why things taste a certain way, what flavor they have, and the mistakes you make in the kitchen start to make you question why you made a certain mistake. So I started putting together a database of all the ingredients. It started with that. I found the organic chemistry composition of all these ingredients, and found that a carrot can have 200 different flavors in it. Some flavors are dominant and some are not, but there's a reason behind all of them. What gives a carrot, what gives an apple, what gives any ingredient its flavor. And I found this to be really useful, even though from a scientist's point of view it's a lot of information. A chef wants more kind of to the point information, wants questions answered in the kitchen when they're working. But I thought the world of apps has made this so easy for a person to use an app in a practical situation to get a question answered. So my challenge was taking all the scientific information and making it useful. And for this, my experience as a computer scientist was very useful. I started finding a logical algorithm which took all this data and made it useful in the kitchen. So let's say you had leftovers, you needed to do something with it. You had a lot of carrots, you wanted to know how to combine it with something. You didn't like a certain flavor, or you didn't like eating something, or you were allergic to something. So these are very practical questions, and it doesn't always help to open a recipe book or to Google to find an answer. Normally you would pick up the phone and call your mother or call somebody who knows a lot. And I thought that I would make a software that could work very similar to this. And then the gap between the scientific world and the chef's world could be reduced. And this was very satisfying for me, because I could finally use my computer science experience. I hated it. I don't know how I passed my exams. But this made me really grateful that I had that experience and I had this passion and I could put it together. It's completely normal to wonder, does someone need so much passion? Do you have to cook for 5,000 people? But that's not the point. I would like to teach people how to cook, And I think because I have so much experience and I look at cooking as not just cooking, but I take a broader scientific view to it, I can use all my experience to teach people how to cook. So I don't think one really needs to learn all this about cooking, but if one is learning from a person rather than reading a recipe book, it's a much more interesting way to learn. Because a recipe book, if you make the same recipe once and you make it a second time, it might not taste the same. And you might wonder, and usually you think, oh, I'm just a bad cook, or this is a bad recipe book. And neither of those two things is true. So what I want to do after all these years and learning it this way is I want to teach people, because I think that's the best way to cook and also gives you the most memories. Because part of the fun of cooking is to be able to feed someone else, and a book can never give you this interaction. So what are my plans with everything? I often thought I have such a muddled past and I want to do so many things. And I decided to really make a plan out of this. I thought to make this into a software, to think about things like who's going to use this, how they're going to use it, being able to set up a business and to sell this. And so my plan is, my software is called Culina. I started writing a blog a long time back as a process of just being able to refine what I think. And I found at the end of all my ramblings for 3 years that there was a very strong desire in me to take basically everything in my head and to put it into a software. I would like that chefs in a restaurant use this, because working in a restaurant really limits creativity. Restaurants are often very busy. You have to shop and you have to cook. A restaurant kitchen is small and exhausting from the heat and the sounds and the smells, that it's very hard to be creative as a chef. So I would like this to be something, a tool that chefs can use. They can basically ask questions to the tool, get a few answers, which makes it more fun for them to be creative. And I want cooking schools to maybe use this, because people have the basic rules in cooking are the same. And then on top, and as chefs anyway like to reinvent classics, fusion's becoming something very common. So the same chef might use basil in a recipe, another chef will use rosemary in a recipe. And my software can deal with all these different flavor accents. So I think it could be a really good tool for chefs to use. Finally, I want the tool in a more advanced stage to be used by home cooks. And so these are basically my plans for this. I think it will be used more easily because you can carry it on your phone. It's got the information of 10 volumes of cookbooks, total of 10,000 pages, but it's much more portable. So these are my plans.